Just a little more than a week after accusing President Trump of using the N-word, former White House aide Omarosa Manigault Newman continued to call Mr. Trump a racist over the weekend.
The one thing that I realized once I was in, that he was disingenuous about his commitment to diversity. He could care less if African-American civil rights leaders, anyone came to the table, because he had his agenda, and that agenda did not include advancing and uniting the African-American community. In fact, I believe he wants to start a race war in this country.
Explosive comments. This just days after the president slammed Omarosa on his Twitter page, referring to her as a, quote, crying lowlife and a dog.
Well, the Washington Post, there's a Washington Post article entitled, "I'm Not Going There." As Trump hurls racial invective, most Republicans stay silent. It examines how the president's rhetoric is putting members of his own party in hot water, but also how they're shying away from even commenting on it or certainly not admonishing him. Seung Kim was one of the writers of that article, and she is a White House reporter for the Washington Post and joins us now from Washington. I thought it was very, very interesting, the valiant attempts to get Republicans just to comment, not even to sort of say something bad about some of the dog whistles that we're hearing, but they wouldn't even go there at all. So
I'm not going there.
No, I'm not going there.
That was the title of the piece that Seung wrote, and that's what they said.
And also sort of the idea of sort of belittling it, like that's sort of too low for me to discuss. But anyways, so Tim Scott of South Carolina, the only black Republican serving in the Senate, he was one of the few senators to actually reply to your interview request. You asked a bunch of senators and some members of the House, can we talk about this? What did he have to say on the issue of race and the president?
So he was very careful during my interview with him to not tie it too much to the president. I think some of the, we didn't use this particular quote in the story, but what he told me was that the state of race relations in this country it seems to be at a lower point right now than in recent memory. But I think what some of the, and he did rebuke the president on his behavior after the incident in Charlottesville last year. But what Senator Scott pointed out to me is that, in a subtle way, is that for a lot of these Republican lawmakers who do disagree on how the president has approached this issue of race, basically the only thing they can do is speak up on their own. And that's what Tim Scott has tried to do repeatedly. He had a private meeting with the president after the Charlottesville incident last year. He had, and that's kind of what he emphasized to me, that if he looks back in this history, looks back at this point in the history of the Republican Party, 10 to 15 years from now, when it comes to the GOP and race, he's going to remember it. He's like, I'm glad that, you know, I had integrity, that I spoke out when I felt that was wrong, and I did it in my own way.
You know, it's interesting. In the piece, you quote Senator John Cornyn of Texas, asking him about this, and he says, I've got more important things on my mind. I think the important thing is to pay attention, I'm quoting him here, to what the president does, which I think has been good for the country. I'm old enough to remember when the entire world got very aggressive with former President Obama for just simply saying, you didn't build that. In fact, people still remind me of the president saying those words when he was delivering a speech. Other than Senator Bob Corker of Tennessee, Senator Jeff Flake of Arizona, who are both leaving the Congress, they've been vocal opponents, but even that opposition or the comments that they've made has sort of been lukewarm.
Exactly, and I don't think it's a coincidence that of the Republicans that we talk, of the Republican lawmakers that we were able to talk to eventually, that the two sharpest critics of how the president has handled the issue of race are the two people who are leaving the Congress after this year. One was Senator Bob Corker, who in the story told me that this is part, he's upset about it, that this is the part of the administration's strategy to conquer and divide. This another quote that we didn't use in the story, but that what Senator Corker told me is that this is not the Republican Party that I know. This is not the Republican Party that I joined decades ago. Senator Flake was also very not shy in listing off specifically at what points during the presidency of Donald Trump or even the campaign of Donald Trump did he feel that Trump said something that was racially insensitive or offensive or made him uncomfortable. You know, he cited the first day of his campaign when he made those comments comments about immigrants from Mexico. He went actually all the way back to the presidency of Barack Obama when the president spread the myth that the Barack Obama was not born in the United States. But it is surprising that, or not surprising, that the most candid lawmakers are the ones who are leaving, because there is a segment of the Republican population who responded those strategies, not necessarily the race-filled language, but the fact that the president is not politically correct, that the president is willing to, in the words of the voters, say it like it is, and people who are still, and the Republicans who are still in elected office are very cognizant of that.
Yeah, I mean, part of the argument is that Republican lawmakers are being cautious because the president is very, very popular with the base, and they don't want to jeopardize their own support by crossing the president. But I want to ask you, is this something that's happening right now because we have this president that seems to break all the rules and it's fine? Or, does the Republican Party have a history of maybe being hesitant or cautious when it comes to discussing race?
I think there's definitely a history that has evolved over time when it comes to this issue. But I also want to point out just how dramatic the switch has been, even in recent years, when it comes to Republican Party and this issue. I mean, it was not long ago, it was just in 2012 that Mitt Romney lost the Latino vote in significant numbers, and that spurred the Republican Party to take on comprehensive immigration reform, to do a full autopsy of their party to figure out just where we went wrong in courting minority voters and trying to figure out why minority voters were driven from the party. I remember when Sean Hannity, the Fox News host, said after the 2012 elections that we as a party need to do comprehensive immigration reform. I don't think that's rhetoric that you're hearing from him quite at this moment. But, just 4 years later, you had Donald Trump, who rose on a platform that was completely different than that, was able to win in key states, was able to win the presidency and court a lot of on a strategy of courting white men voters, white voters, like the working class voters. So a lot of Republicans tell me privately that they feel this is kind of a blip in the history of the party. But Donald Trump is the leader of the party, and you see how influential the rhetoric of the leader of that party can be, even when a lot of elected Republican officials disagree with that message.
But Seung-min, in your article, and I encourage our viewers to check it out on the Washington Post website, you do point to a history going back to the early 1960s of incidences where perhaps some Republicans today are telling you it's a blip, and we all recall after Mitt Romney lost the presidency, or he attempted to run for president against Barack Obama, the Republicans talked about bringing in more people, more diverse people into the Republican Party. But in your article, you do point out, going back to the 1960s, the Southern strategy, for example, that was employed by Richard Nixon to bring in those Southern Democrats who were opposed to civil rights actions taken by LBJ back in the 1960s. Also, Ronald Reagan delivered a speech on states' rights near Mississippi, in Philadelphia, Mississippi. That is the town where those 3 civil rights workers were killed by the KKK. So they may be calling it a blip now, but in your piece you point out that there has been some historical antecedents, including, for example, Willie Horton, which was used as a campaign strategy by former President George H.W. Bush.
And that's why a lot of times it's hard to square what they say privately with the history of the party. But I think, and also partly why the President Trump's strategy may have worked in the 2016 campaign, but you're seeing the backlash to that because the president has gone so far on the issue of race, whether it's particularly with his rhetoric, most notably after Charlottesville. But I think in looking forward, how does that, is that a strategy that Republicans keep using in 2020, 2024 and beyond? I know a lot of people in the party, Senator Corker, Senator Flake included, would not want the Republican Party to be like that. Remember, especially Senator Flake, when I was talking with him, he was talking about in the context of his own changing state, the demographics of Arizona, where Democrats, while that still remains a primarily Republican state, Democrats do have a great shot of seizing that state in the coming election cycles, particularly of the changing demographics and the fact that the Republican Party has shunned those demographics.
It's a really fascinating article. Seung Kim, you reported, of course, with your colleagues there at the Washington Post, including Ashley Parker and Robert Costa. So we want to give them a shout out. But it's really, really great reporting and some valuable insight for our viewers. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.